Donald Trump has made a big and risky announcement. The US will start a naval blockade in the Strait of Hormuz. This comes after ceasefire talks with Iran failed over the weekend. Let's break this simply. The Strait of Hormuz is extremely important. Nearly 20% of the world's oil passes through this narrow waterway. So anything that happens here affects global fuel prices very quickly. And right now, Iran has not fully closed the strait, but it has been controlling it. Some ships are allowed through, others are delayed. Reports say Iran is even charging up to $2 million per ship. At the same time, Iran is also still sending its own oil out. And this is where Trump's move comes in. On Sunday, he said the US Navy will block ships going in and out of the strait. He accused Iran of world extortion and warned of strong military action if US forces are attacked.
We have a lot of people, as you know, at 10 o'clock tomorrow, we have a blockade going into effect. That'll be 10 o'clock tomorrow. Other nations are working so that Iran will not be able to sell oil. And that will be very effective. But what we want to do is we want to, and again, we don't need it. What we notice and what we see and what I think is maybe my idea, maybe not, I don't know. But there are many boats heading toward our country to fill up with oil and then go and take it. So they're not going to go through the Hormuz Strait. And ultimately that'll be corrected. But in the meantime, they're using us. We have more oil because of drill, baby, drill. We have more oil than Russia and Saudi Arabia put together.
But within hours, the plan changed slightly. US Central Command clarified that not all ships will be blocked. The focus will be on vessels linked to Iranian ports. Ships going to the US-friendly Gulf countries will still be allowed. And that the operation is expected to begin soon. Now, how will this actually work? The US has not shared full details, but experts say the Navy will likely avoid firing at oil tankers. That could cause a massive environmental disaster. Instead, they may warn ships, force them to turn around, or even board them and take control. Still, this is not easy.
There are many possible implications of the Hormuz Strait being closing. Some are short-term, some are long-term. Naturally, those on short-term has to do with the influence that those has in global markets, particularly oil prices, the effects that it has on inflationary pressure. But in the long run is the one that I'm pretty much more worried about. So the issues of that choke point being closed is that if it connects to other choke points being closed, then that will be quite catastrophic for the whole supply chain. And here come some signals. The Bab el-Mandeb Strait, the access to the Suez Canal, could be easily disrupted by the Houthis if they, let's put it this way, actively takes the Iranian cause.
Clearly, the blockade is difficult to maintain. So why is Trump doing this? The main issue is control of the strait. During recent talks, Iran wanted to keep control and possibly charge ships permanently. The US and its allies strongly rejected this idea. They say the strait should remain open for free global use. By blockading the route, the US is trying to remove Iran's power here. However, there's another key reason: oil money. Iran has been exporting around 1.85 million barrels of oil per day. This brings in huge revenue for Tehran. Interestingly, the US had allowed this to happen until now. In fact, it even relaxed some sanctions recently. Around 140 million barrels of Iranian oil were allowed to be sold. This was done to keep global oil supply steady and avoid price spikes. But this also meant Iran was making money during the war. Now Trump is changing that approach. A blockade could cut off this income. However, there is a big risk. Less oil supply usually means higher prices. We are already seeing that. After Trump's announcement, oil prices jumped sharply. US crude crossed $104 per barrel. Brent crude went above $102. Prices were around $70 before the conflict began.
The cost of everything that we do is going up. And the income for everything that we do is going down. And just availability of stuff is also getting to be a challenge. And then I've got so many friends that I've got, customers who can't afford to shop with us anymore. I've got farmer friends who've gone bankrupt.
However, experts say prices could go even higher. But it depends on how Iran reacts. If Iran or its allies target other oil routes, the situation could worsen quickly. But there is also a risk to the ceasefire. Iran's Revolutionary Guards have warned that any US blockade will be seen as a violation. They say they will respond strongly. Iran also insists the strait is still under its control. Meanwhile, Trump has also hinted that US strikes inside Iran could resume. Reports suggest military options are being considered again. So where does this leave things? Because just days ago, there was hope that talks would calm the situation. Markets were optimistic. That mood has now changed. Everything now depends on the next move. If the blockade works, it could weaken Iran and reopen the strait fully. That might stabilize oil prices later. But if tensions rise, this could turn into a bigger crisis. Oil prices could surge, global markets could take another hit. In simple terms, this is a high-risk gamble. And right now, the whole world is watching what happens next. Now, to get us more perspective on this, we are joined by Nader Hashimi, who is a West Asia expert joining us live from Washington, D.C. Welcome to the program. Beginning with, do you think this is a blockade strategic masterstroke by Donald Trump, or does it risk spiraling into a much bigger and more dangerous conflict in the region?
The latter, not the former. When you talk about Donald Trump and masterstroke, you're, I think, putting a lot of hope in the foreign policy of Donald Trump. And as your introduction sort of mentioned, there's a lot of incoherency here, because during the context of the recent war with Iran, the United States lifted sanctions on Iranian oil in order to stabilize global oil prices. Now it's imposing a blockade on the same oil in the same country, suggesting that there's not a lot of coordination and coherence here. And Donald Trump has basically found himself in a box because of a policy that he's pursued that he hasn't thought out very clearly, and now he's responding to try and put a face-saving sort of presentation to the American public for this policy toward Iran that continues to unravel with every passing day.
Right, but we're also seeing oil prices jump sharply. How much worse could this get for global markets and everyday consumers if tensions continue to rise in the Strait of Hormuz?
Well, it could get much worse. As we're speaking right now, the blockade has begun. Iran has threatened that it's going to respond in kind, claiming that if it can't use its ports for trade and commerce, no other country in the region should be able to do that. So now the ball is very much in Iran's court to try and respond. And if it does respond, it's going to continue to raise oil prices and shock global markets, having deeply destabilizing effects. So we're still in the early phases of this. It could get much, much worse.
And finally, before I let you go, with Iran warning of a strong response, how likely is it that this move could completely derail ceasefire efforts and lead to fresh military escalation?
That possibility is there. My own view is that I think the United States has realized that the cost of pursuing further military activity against Iran outweighs the benefits. And that's why we're talking about a naval blockade. In other words, economic pressure instead of military pressure. But with Donald Trump, you never know what can happen. So I would still leave that as an option, but a much less probability. On a scale of 1 to 10, I think resuming military attacks on Iran, probably on a scale of 1 to 10, I would put it at a 3 at best. I think we're looking at economic pressure for now.
Nader Hashimi, thank you for your time and speaking to Firstpost.
Thank you.